Could former Stanley Cup winner Mike Babcock re-enter the NHL ranks, and could he do so as the next head coach of the New York Rangers? And would the Rangers have any interest in proven regular season winner Bruce Boudreau? We debate on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers. Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 828 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. We are also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. And as I just mentioned a second ago, going to continue our offseason series here where we're looking at different candidates to be the head coach of the New York Rangers. And we continue doing so with Mike Babcock and then Bruce Boudreau, and we'll go ahead and start with Mike Babcock here. Babcock, a hockey lifer. He's now 60 years old. Has coached 17 seasons in the NHL with the Ducks, the Red Wings, and the Leafs. I always think of him more as the Red Wings coach. He spent the most time there, and that's just the team that I closely associate him with. That's, of course, also the team with which he won a Stanley Cup. And for his career, Babcock with a record of 700, 148, 19 and 164, So that's just an excellent track record there. He spent, to kind of just go through his whole coaching career here, 2 seasons with the Ducks, once again, 10 seasons with the Red Wings, and then 5 seasons with the Maple Leafs, and has had success pretty much everywhere, I would say, except for Toronto. With the Ducks, he actually got them to the Stanley Cup Finals in 2002, 2003. That was his first season as the head coach of the Ducks, and they lost in 7 games to the New Jersey Devils. The Ducks were a 7 seed that year, swept the Red Wings in the first round of the playoffs, so they obviously had quite the Cinderella run there. But then in his second year as the Ducks head coach, they missed the playoffs. He quickly resurfaces with the Detroit Red Wings in 2005, 2006. He got the Red Wings to the playoffs in all 10 seasons that he spent there. Of course, Detroit had that crazy streak where they just made the playoffs year after year after year. I forget what the final count was, but it was something pretty absurd, and it obviously came to an end in recent seasons here. But he was there for a good chunk of that, and of course, he won the Stanley Cup with the Red Wings in 2007, 2008, which was his 3rd season in Detroit. They beat the Penguins in the finals that year. The following year, they get back to the Stanley Cup Finals, but this time they lose to the Penguins. And of course, at that time, Detroit was still a Western Conference team. They had not yet moved over to the Eastern Conference. But at that point in his career, Babcock is 6 seasons into his NHL career as a head coach, 2 with Anaheim, and then 4 with Detroit. 3 times in his first 6 seasons, he got his team to the Stanley Cup Finals. So obviously, this is somebody who had immediate success, and of course, the one championship with Detroit, the first of the 2 years that they made it to the finals. Then after his 10 seasons with Detroit, he immediately becomes the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and from his first through his 5th seasons in Toronto, the Leafs missed the playoffs. That was the first year. The second year, they lost in the first round. 3rd year, they lost in the first round. 4th year, they lost in the first round. And then Babcock was fired in the middle of the 5th season after that. And that leads me into, we're not going to talk about this quite yet, but the reasons for which he was fired as head coach of Toronto. One thing I'll say about Babcock here, though, is, for Ranger fans that are looking for this team to become bigger, tougher, more physical, whatever it might be, Babcock may not necessarily be your guy because he's kind of known for being the head coach of teams that were kind of built around skill and puck possession, not so much, the toughness and the snarl and the physicality and all that stuff. Obviously, he won despite that. But, between Detroit, obviously they had some tremendously talented players there, and Toronto, a lot of the star players that are on Toronto right now were there when Babcock was the coach. And, again, teams that are more known for skill and speed and puck possession as opposed to the physical stuff. But one thing that I think Babcock has working in his favor is you just kind of hope, given that he tends to get the most out of his skill players, that he would be able to unlock some things in some current players that are on the Ranger roster. The first names that come to mind for me are, Capo Caco, Philip Hedl, Alexis Lafreniere, and probably in the not too distant future, guys like Will Cooley, guys like Brian Hoffman. These guys are talented players, but in the case of the three kids from the kid line, they have another level to get to. You would have to think. I mean, I know Philip Hedl kind of broke out this year, but even Hedl, I think, can probably get to another level, and certainly Caco and Lafreniere can as well. And obviously, whenever Cooley and Hoffman are around, kind of the same deal there. You're hoping that he can unlock something in them. And I mean, you're also hoping that he can reach Artemi Panarin when it comes to Stanley Cup playoff time. Because as we've discussed on here, it's been well documented by pretty much everybody that covers or watches the Rangers or whatever it might be. Artemi Panarin just did not have much of anything in the playoffs this year. And you're hoping that, Babcock, if he was the coach for the Rangers, that he can, come in here and reach Artemi Panarin and get him to a whole new level come Stanley Cup playoff time. Going to continue to talk about Babcock and his credentials and, the question of whether or not he could end up being the next head coach of the New York Rangers. And we're going to do all that in just a second here. But first, we got to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun that you're about to have. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, we just want to go ahead and thank everybody for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And for the everydayers, you definitely want to come back in tomorrow's episode. I'm leaning toward doing a mailbag episode. Obviously a lot of Ranger fans, very passionate, and there's a lot of hot button topics right now about, everything that happened in the playoff series against the Devils, what changes the Rangers could make. Is anybody going to get traded? Is a big name going to be on the way out of New York this offseason? And certainly what we're talking about today, and that is, of course, who will be the next head coach of the New York Rangers. A lot of Ranger fans have a lot of very passionate opinions on this, and I just want to kind of get the pulse of Ranger Nation and see what you guys are thinking and what you're saying about all these different topics. But for today, let's keep everything rolling here. I want to continue talking about Mike Babcock. So obviously, the most recent thing that happened to him in the NHL was he was fired by the Toronto Maple Leafs in the middle of year 5 there, and then reports surfaced that it was largely because former players had accused him of basically bullying techniques. And there are a few different examples that I can share here. There was a former defenseman, Mike Commodore, kind of a long-standing rivalry with Babcock. They were together both in Anaheim and in Detroit. Commodore alleges that Babcock had just kind of like a personal vendetta against him and held him back as a result of that. Johan Franz, and this is the one that really kind of made national news as far as in the hockey world here. But Johan Franzen played for Babcock in Detroit. And when asked about Babcock, Franzen was complimentary of, his ability to coach a team and his ability to prepare for hockey games and what have you. But he also called him a terrible man, the worst person I've ever met. He also accused that Babcock verbally abused him. Chris Chelios, who was a teammate of Franzen with Detroit, backed up Franzen's claims and said that it was true. Chelios said that Babcock, quote-unquote, verbally assaulted Franzen during a playoff series in Detroit. And this is what Franzen had to say about the entire, tenure that he was with Mike Babcock. I get the shivers when I think about it. That incident occurred against Nashville in the playoffs. It was coarse, nasty, and shocking, but that was just one of 100 things he did, the tip of the iceberg. And in 2018, Franzen also revealed that he had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, also dealt with severe anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, and was, once again, quote-unquote, terrified of being at the rink after the first time that Babcock really laid into him. And, for his full quote here, this is what Franzen said. He's a terrible person, the worst I have ever met. He's a bully who was attacking people. It could be a cleaner at the arena in Detroit or anybody. He would lay into people without any reason. And so a lot to unpack here. I mean, I know there's going to be people that say, well, that's old school coaching, and that's just how it was back in the day. And, Babcock, he's as old school as they come, and, he's doing that to push his players and this, that, and the other thing. Look, I get that as a coach, especially in the NHL, where you're dealing with adults and not like high school kids or anything like that. At times I think you do have to, make it clear who's in charge and lay into your team and push them a little bit. And clearly Babcock is not shy about doing that. But to me, there are limits. You can't be verbally berating somebody to the point where you're causing, or you at least have a hand in causing, what are all the symptoms here? Severe anxiety, depression, and panic attacks. To me, that's taking it just a little bit too far. And, I was not there, but the fact that, Franzen has said this, and that, Chelios kind of backed up the accusations. I mean, I think where there's smoke, there's fire here. As far as Babcock's response to this, he said, "Nothing can hurt you more than something like this. Your whole plan as a coach and your plan as a parent is to provide the best opportunity for everybody to be the best they can be, and that's what you do to have success, and you can't have success year after year in any league without a good environment. It just doesn't happen." Again, there's two sides to every story, but there were a lot of stories about Babcock coming out like this. There was another really weird one when he was at Detroit, and Babcock does not deny this one at all, hasn't sugarcoated it or anything like that, basically just, admitted that it was true. Mitch Marner, he asked Mitch Marner to make a list of all of his Toronto Maple Leaf teammates, and he wanted Marner to rank them from, best work ethic to, I guess, worst work ethic. And Marner, did what his coach told him. And then Babcock, without telling Marner, shared this list with the entire team. That's just detrimental to your team. I mean, are you trying to cause, a lack of camaraderie in the locker room? Are you trying to cause issues? Are you trying to cause drama? I'm just not really sure what the point of that would be, and it's not fair to somebody like Mitch Marner. It's just a weird thing to have him do in the first place, but then to share the list with the teammates, that's even more ridiculous. For what it's worth, he did apologize to Marner for that and admit that he was wrong in doing it. Babcock and all these things we just talked about, they all vary in terms of, seriousness and everything. Babcock is a mental health advocate. He's done work with numerous mental health groups over the years. There is that. He does have that working in his favor. But obviously, somebody that when all these reports came to light, as good of a coach as he's been and as much success as he's had, and of course taking or going to the Stanley Cup 3 different times, the Stanley Cup finals, teams weren't exactly lining up around the block to hire him as their next head coach. Now, it has been 5 years, I believe, since he's coached in the NHL. It's possible that, he gets another chance here. It could be with the Rangers. I mean, we'll see. He did spend one season as head coach of the University of Saskatchewan, but he announced his retirement after that one season. Now, did he really retire, or was that just kind of a way of resigning nicely and saying, I'm retiring, and would he listen if an NHL team gave him a call, Rangers or otherwise? It's an interesting question, and one that I'm sure only Mike Babcock right now can answer. Is he my top choice to become the next head coach of the New York Rangers after everything that we've just discussed here? To be quite honest, not really, no. You've got the whole bullying situation. And yes, he had a lot of success early in his career. I mentioned a minute ago about how his first 6 seasons as an NHL head coach, he got to the finals 3 times and, of course, won in the finals the 1 year with Detroit and won a Stanley Cup there. But his second half of his career, a little bit of a different story in terms of the success or lack thereof that he has had. In his last 7 years as a coach, which includes his last 2 years with Detroit, as well as all 5 years that he spent with Toronto there, he did not win a single playoff series in any of those 7 years combined. And of course, the 5th and final year with Toronto, he never got the chance because he was fired before they ever got there. But still, I mean, that's quite the drop-off for a coach that was used to making deep playoff runs and honestly used to taking his team to the Stanley Cup finals. That almost became commonplace for Babcock, at least for a little while there. But again, I think the biggest thing Babcock has in his favor, if you're a fan of this move or you think he should be the guy for the Rangers, is, once again, a lot of the teams that he's won with had very high skill levels, and there are some players on the Rangers who are believed to be very skilled players who show flashes of it, whether it's Lafreniere, Kakko, Hedl, a couple other guys as well. But we just don't see it consistently enough. And, Artemi Panarin in the playoffs, I think, is a good example of that as well. So I think it's at least possible that for that reason, Babcock could be a good hire. Maybe he helps get some of those players to that next level. I think that's the best thing that Babcock has going for him as it pertains to him maybe being the next coach of the Rangers. But, again, we don't even know if he wants to coach, if he'd be interested in the job. A lot of questions have to be answered there. And, again, he's not going to be at the top of my list. I can see making a case for him. But, we're just going to have to wait and see how it all shakes out. To me, he's not really a favorite, but somebody to maybe at least keep an eye on. One other thing I want to mention here is a couple people have kind of been running with the idea that, they shouldn't hire a coach. The Rangers shouldn't hire a coach that's already won a Stanley Cup because no Stanley Cup or no coach has won a Stanley Cup with two different teams. And I'm not really all that concerned about that. I'm going to explain why in just a second. And we're also going to talk about Bruce Boudreau and the possibility of him potentially becoming the next head coach of the New York Rangers as well. We'll do all that good stuff in just a second here. But first, got to let everybody know, today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Athletic Greens, which I use literally every day. I started taking AG1 because I wanted a supplement that actually tastes great, and I wanted to see what all the hype was about. Now I've been on it for about a year, and I love it. It doesn't taste like it's super healthy, has kind of a mild tropical taste that I actually look forward to each morning. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, nervous system, immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging. It is lifestyle-friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. It costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it is cheaper than your cold brew habit. Athletic Greens has over 7,000 5-star reviews. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, we're going to keep everything rolling here. We're going to get to Bruce Boudreau in just a second and talk about his credentials, his track record, and whether he could be a good fit or reasons why he might not be a good fit to be the next head coach as the New York Rangers. But as I mentioned just a second ago, there's certain Ranger fans, and I'm sure there's fans in general that do this as well, but they're kind of grabbing onto this narrative right now that no coach in NHL history has won the Stanley Cup with two separate teams. I really don't care about that stat at all. I honestly could not possibly care less. First of all, it's one of those things, sooner or later, it's eventually going to happen. You will have somebody that wins the Stanley Cup with two different teams. But the idea that it can't happen or that somebody wins the Stanley Cup somewhere else and that means they're less likely to win it with a new team, to me, that just doesn't really make any sense. Now, listen, if you would rather the Rangers go with somebody who's never been a head coach in the NHL just to get some fresh blood and give somebody else a chance, you can certainly make that case. If you want to go with somebody that's never won a Stanley Cup in the past despite coaching in the NHL, like, say, Bruce Boudreau, for example, you can make that case as well. I've got no issues with that whatsoever. But the idea that, the Rangers would be that there's no way they could win a Stanley Cup if they hired a head coach who's already won a Stanley Cup. To me, that's just nonsensical. It's not something that really makes any sense. Like I said, sooner or later, it will happen. And I don't think coaches that win a Stanley Cup with one team suddenly become less likely to win it with another team. That argument just doesn't really hold any water, at least for me. But anyway, turning our attention to Bruce Boudreau here, 68 years old, has spent 16 seasons coaching in the NHL with the Capitals, Ducks, Wild, and most recently, the Canucks. He played 141 games in the NHL and has quite the track record here. His career record in the NHL with, once again, Caps, Ducks, Wild, and Canucks, 617, 342, and 128. And he also reached 200 regular season career wins faster than any other coach in the modern era. He has never had a losing season, before this most recent season that he spent with the Canucks, in which he was fired just this past season, right in the middle of the year there. I think the big knock on Boudreau is that his teams do not do very well in the playoffs, like at all. His track record in the playoffs, frankly, is a little bit scary. 5 seasons with the Capitals. That was his first stop as an NHL head coach. Under Boudreau, the Capitals got past the first round only twice in those 5 years, and they never made it past the second round. Then you've got 5 seasons that he spent with the Anaheim Ducks. They got past the first round only twice in his 5 years there. He reached his first conference finals in 2014-2015. That's also his only appearance in the conference finals to date, just that one season. And the Ducks were eliminated by the Blackhawks that season, once again in 2014-2015. And the other kind of dubious stat that Boudreau and company put together there in Anaheim is that they lost 4 straight Game 7s in 4 consecutive seasons, and all 4 were in Anaheim. All 4 were on home ice. So I don't know about you guys, and I know that what he did in Anaheim years ago, it shouldn't matter that much, at least with something like this, for what he would do in New York. But if the Rangers are playing a Game 7 at home in Madison Square Garden with Bruce Boudreau as the coach, it's going to have a little bit of an ominous feel to it. It's not to say that they're doomed, they can't possibly win the game. Boudreau will never win a home Game 7 or anything like that. But it would be a little bit ominous. I think that's the best word for it. But then he spent 4 seasons with the Minnesota Wild, made the playoffs only twice, never got past the first round there, was fired in the middle of his 4th season. And then these last 2 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks, he missed the playoffs his first year, then he was fired in the middle of his 2nd season. I will say this, the way the Canucks handled this with Boudreau this past season was complete and utter garbage. They basically let it slip that they were looking to replace him, which, either do it or don't do it. And it kind of became, I don't know if this is ever 100% confirmed, but it began very much to look like what they were doing. The Canucks were obviously struggling last year. They lost their first 7 games and obviously had a bad season. But when they were about to fire Boudreau, they basically were waiting for the Canucks to get out of a tough part of their schedule. They were playing the Avalanche, and there was another team that was really good in there too. They were waiting for that to happen to then fire Boudreau and then bring in his replacement so that his replacement could, start fresh with, an easy collection of opponents that were coming up. And Boudreau handled it about as well as he could. That's one thing you have to like about Boudreau. He's a class act. By all accounts, his players love him. The fan bases love him everywhere he goes. I know in Vancouver, they would play Whoop, There It Is, and they would chant Bruce, There It Is for him. So it sounds like, despite everything not really going very well in Vancouver while he was there, and obviously the team's struggling a little bit, it sounds like mostly his players supported him. And I think, Boudreau, he had the court of public opinion certainly in his favor as well because of the way the Canucks handled his firing, which, like I said, was absolute garbage. Honestly, even if you want to just get through that tough part of your schedule and then fire him, to me, have some conviction, fire him right away and get your new coach in there and let him go up against the good teams, right? But the biggest mistake that they made was just volunteering the information that they were looking to replace him while he was still the coach there. And then they allowed him to continue coaching games, continue coaching against all these tough teams. The Canucks kept losing, and then finally they ultimately did fire him. But it's a very strange situation. But like I said, Boudreau took it all in stride. He added some humor to it, during a couple of his press conferences. The one, he got pretty emotional. The other one, he was kind of joking, like, I'll see you guys tomorrow, I hope, because at that point, he didn't know when the sword was going to fall. Like I said, it was just a garbage way for them to treat him on the way out. But the other thing, and I've kind of alluded to this already, that must be said about Bruce Boudreau, a little bit of a player's coach, and who does that remind you of? Yeah, that would be Gerard Gallant, the guy that the Rangers just mutually parted with. So, to me, if you're going to go with Bruce Boudreau and everything we know about him, you might as well just stick with Gerard Gallant because it sounds like they're both kind of players' coaches. And if the Rangers weren't responding to Gallant at the end there, what makes me think that they're going to respond to Bruce Boudreau, who seems to conduct himself in a similar way? The only difference is that Gallant has had more playoff success over the years than has Bruce Boudreau. So to me, that would just be a downgrade. And honestly, and I'm not saying this is an insult, Bruce Boudreau kind of feels like a little bit of a poor man's Gerard Gallant. It's just it's a lateral move at best. It doesn't really change anything as far as the coaching approach and how they deal with their players, being players, coaches. So to me, it just doesn't really make that much sense. But the one thing you cannot take away from Bruce Boudreau, the guy is loved by, obviously different players that he's had. and different fan bases. This is what Andrew Cogliano had to say about it. He played for Boudreau in Anaheim. He's done a good job throughout the league. We had a lot of success in Anaheim, and I attribute a lot of my success in the league to him. I love him. And he's certainly not alone in his sentiments for Bruce Boudreau. And I got to be honest, I don't think Boudreau, kind of like Babcock, they're not going to be at the top of my list. But you know what? They're coaching retreads. That's kind of the reason why. But I'm sure, look, if the Rangers want to at least do their due diligence, talk to Bruce Boudreau, I'm cool with that too. Like I said, if I'm being completely honest, I just don't think either him or Babcock, kind of for different reasons, would be all that close to the top of my list. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time.